What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're actually going to be talking about and breaking down one of my most recent wedding films, The Fullers. If you haven't watched this wedding film, I recommend going and watching that first. We're obviously about to spoil the whole thing. Now, the first 10 minutes of this breakdown will be right here on YouTube, but if you're interested in watching the entire breakdown as well as receiving the project files, this will be available inside the JPM Live Academy, and you can sign up by using the links in the description. Now, let's get into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is our timeline. I bring this up all the time about just trying to stay organized. I did try my best to stay organized, but there were some bits and pieces throughout it where things kind of fell off. But for the most part, if you look here, if I minimize this, you see that we've got everything kind of broken down in chunks. And that's kind of how I'm going to explain this edit, where we got the pink, then it goes green, purple, pink, orange, yellow, orange. The colors to me don't really correlate to a specific scene. It's really just a visual distinction of like, hey, this scene changed or something's different or this is a new moment. I knew the day of that we were going to do something different because of how the venue looked. Gabby is a really big content influencer. She does a lot in the wedding space. And so I knew that this had to be one of those weddings that we just couldn't miss. There's a lot of pressure when you get that, but we just couldn't miss. The girl that was reading our intro for us was actually, she didn't have an accent at all. The way that we actually filmed it, so I went outside, I literally took the NTG3, we pointed it as close as we could get to her, and we recorded the clip like this.
Kyle had recently separated from the Air Force, built himself a trailer, and was traveling around planning to settle down in Alabama.
So I actually was asked this a lot, whether or not that voiceover was AI. It was actually real. As you can see, we had her read it. And then all I did was when we went outside, is I told her a bunch of times, I was like, hey, I need you to just say it kind of with the same cadence that you did when we were doing the voiceover. That way I can just sync it up. One, go.
This is their story.
And I basically had her do that a handful of times, and it ended up working great. I got some different angles just to kind of mix it up. One thing that I do want to point out with your intros or just trailers in general, this is one of my favorite things to do. It's just a simple fade. It adds so much depth, so much character. It kind of helps things flow along because these are mini moments. They're not complete scenes in the trailer. You're going to need a way to kind of end it.
She had decided to hit
so we do these fades here.
In a camper van. She had converted herself at the end of 2020.
Now, one thing I want to say about the dialogue, so I have this on a voiceover track, and I'll bounce over to the Fairlight page. This is one of the easiest ways now built into DaVinci to clean up your audio, and that's using the voice isolation. I keep it always at about 20%. It sounds the most realistic. Without it turned off, it still sounds good.
Hit the road as well for a year in a camper van. She had decided to hit the road as well for a year in a camper van.
Now, going back to the edit, again, we did this with using the song. A lot of our music comes from MusicBed. I use mountain climbing. I want to be very clear and say that using a cinematic song is not going to make your film cinematic. Don't force the feeling. Don't force it. If it feels good, then it should feel good. It should mix right in. It should be perfect, right? If it doesn't, if you just go out and you grab a cinematic song and then you don't have the context or the substance behind it, then something's going to feel off. This voiceover didn't really need much because of how great the voiceover was, how powerful it was at bringing you into the story. But we wanted something that didn't take away from that. Always think about that. Your music should always accompany the dialogue. It should never be overpowering or be so obtrusive that it becomes about the music and less about the story. This is one of the things I see a lot of people struggle with, but my equalizer for music is always around that 1K to 2K range because that's typically where the voice lives. So I'm gonna play the music and I'm gonna turn the EQ off and back on, and you'll kind of hear how it creates this little pocket for her voice to live in.
Recently separated from the Air Force.
This is with it
built
off.
Himself a trailer and was traveling around
And now
planning
on.
to settle down in Alabama. Gabby had decided to hit the road as well for a year in a camper van. She had converted herself at the end of 2020.
So you can instantly hear how just that subtle little EQing on the music track opens it up and adds a little bit of depth for the voice to live in. You can play around with this. There's never a rule, but most voices live between 1,000 kilohertz and 2,000. And so you'll always have to play. For my voice, whenever I'm EQing with music, I'm always around the 2,000 to 2.2 thousand range. And so I always have to be somewhere here because that's where my voice the depth and the prominence of my voice lives. Other voices might be closer to 1K. And you have to just kind of play with that based on the person. Her voice is not going to sound the same as the groom's voice. We're going to have to EQ that and do things a little bit different. I've kind of figured out how to explain how to do this type of editing. And if you think about it like music, you're gonna have a intro, you'll have a verse, you'll have your chorus, you have another verse, you'll have your hook, and then you have your outro. All our wedding films have that similar concept. So our intro is this first part that kind of brings you in. It doesn't have to be a trailer, but that's that first part that brings you in. And then we'll talk a little bit here in a second about our first verse. Our first verse is gonna be when the story begins. After this first part,
congratulations, Gabby and Guile.
we're gonna go into what is known as our first verse, which is gonna be the girls' prep scene here.
In 2008,
One of the best ways that I like to open our scenes is just right out the gate, playing with the peaks and valleys of a wedding day. Let's be honest, weddings are sappy. So knowing that, we need to give it a little bit of life. And you do that with your music, with some of the sound bites. I get it, some of you guys aren't going to motivate moments, so you're not gonna get certain sound bites, but it's okay. As long as you're aware of how to pace it and edit, it'll kind of make things feel a little bit better. Start it on an upbeat note. Even if you start your intro is more on the emotional side, like we had a film that we released a trailer back a little bit ago, and it was for Cassandra John, and that one started really, really slow. And that's fine, but then it instantly sped up. And the reason for that is so that you can play with these different types of emotions. If you have one pace the entire film, honestly, most people probably won't watch it. You want to give it time where people can breathe for a second and go, wow, this is good. And then it ramps back up, then it slows back down. Again, peaks and valleys. Now these intro interviews, now I want to show you guys some of these, because when people ask me what questions should you ask, really just have fun and get to know people. I ask some basic questions a lot just to get people talking. And then as I start hearing what they say, that's when I dive in a little bit more. This is the best way to get interviews, is talk to them first and then just repeat what they said to them, but in the form of a question. So you'll hear me do that now.
Basically, like, you were just kind of explaining, like, you've been waiting for this for so long, and
I know, because I actually brought a journal that Gabby and I shared when we were young. In 2008, it was dated.
So see, I didn't even ask a question. I was still kind of forming the statement, and then it became a conversation. This is what I say all the time. It's not about the questions, it's conversating. All you got to do is have a conversation with them, and they're going to talk back. I basically let her kind of go with her rant, and then I brought it back and was like, okay, more specifically, because she gave me kind of a broad answer, and then I kind of honed in and was like, hey, more specifically, what would you say kind of is like their chemistry? How would you describe it?
what like, if you have to pick, like, more specifically too, like the balance and the chemistry, like, how would you describe the two of them together?
And so again, it's all about just having conversations. And that's the easiest way to get good sound bites. It's never really a specific set list of questions. So what's happening right here in this first part is our actual hook. So I'll play this and then I'll kind of dissect it a little bit. But everything in this green is essentially our first hook. This is our transitional scene. This is what happens going from one point to another point. And for us, this is going to go from our intro, opening up the film, and then go into our very first scene. All right.
2008, one of the to-do lists on our items for our lives was to be in each other's weddings. I feel like he brings a calmness to her. This guy gets her. Like, it's a perfect balance of two people.
She is vivacious. She is your cheerleader. I love being around her. I should not have let you go.
That is like the bonding glue for Gabrielle's friendship.
You're quite literally getting married today. Now the party started.
Okay, so a couple things I want to point out. First off, this is our intro. This is our transition scene, like I said. One of the things that you want to do is, this is a very easy way to kind of help with pacing, is you want to find a shot of someone and then bring them into the frame. So we have her here, we have B-roll of her here, and then it cuts to her dancing. This next shot here, we see her, and then it cuts to another interview. It just kind of helps add a little bit of strategy behind how you're placing these sound bites. One of the other things that I love to do is when you miss a sound bite that's really perfect, staging it. How do you go back and get a sound bite even though it was already perfect? How do you fix it? How do you get it? But this was one of those moments where it happened and I knew we needed to go back and get it because I was on the opposite side. So I was on this side when she said it.
You're quite literally getting married today.
So that, right? I got the soundbite because she was also mic'd up, but the issue is that it would have been great to have her face. It was just me in the bridal suite. So watch what I do in order to get her to repeat it.
Wait. Say that again. Look at her. Say it again.
You are quite literally getting married today.
So you see how the energy changed, but I already had the good dialogue, the good soundbite. So what I did in the edit was that I J-cutted the two clips together.
You're quite literally getting married today.
Just like that. So it literally was one camera angle, but it looked like it was two camera angles. And the only reason we were able to do that is because I already had the soundbite, the good high energy, you're quite literally getting married today. And then I just paired that because there was a little bit of blocking. You can't quite see that her mouth is not entirely in sync, and it happens pretty quick.
Literally getting married today.
So it's a tad bit off, but it actually looks so good. And you would think that that was shot with two camera angles, even though it was only one. So keep that in mind. If you're ever out getting a soundbite and you're like, oh man, I missed it, but you got the dialogue, get them to repeat it. And one of the things that I told her was, oh, look at her and say it again. I didn't say, look at me. Don't look at me. Don't address the camera. I need you to look back at her the same way you were, continuity, and say exactly what you said all over again. The next thing I want to point out is transitioning. So the music, one of the things that I love to do is these super long fades. This you just can't get. You can't do this enough. This just helps things smooth out, and it feels so much more natural than the sometimes the reverb, sometimes just an abrupt stop. And then we add a little bit of wind noise because we have this shot here. You always want to have some sort of sound correlating with the view. So even if it's subtle, you want to add it in so that it doesn't feel dry. Because without it and the music ends, it's kind of like, it's kind of bland, right? We want to be able to have some atmosphere.
Love it, Gab.
And it just sounds more realistic. Like that shot became more realistic. Transitioning into a scene, this is where those detail shots matter. So we get a bunch of detail shots. I still get my ceremony shots. I still get all these exterior shots. But when we use them is in our transitioning moments. All right, y'all, and that's going to wrap us up for the breakdown here on YouTube. Again, if you want access to the entire module, the entire breakdown, and the wedding film project file, you want to become a member of the JPM Live Academy using the link in the description below. Until the next video, y'all, keep creating, keep editing, and I will see you in the next one.